after the longhorn narwhal. Kadlu, of course, could only distribute the women among the huts of the winter village, for no Inuit dare refuse a meal to a stranger. He never knows when his own turn might come to beg. Amarak took the girl, who was about 14, into her house as a sort of servant. From the cut of her sharp-pointed hood and the long diamond pattern of her white deerskin leggings, they supposed she came from Ellesmere Land. She had never seen tin cooking pots or wooden shod sleighs before, but Kotuko the boy and Kotuko the dog were rather fond of her. Then all the foxes went south, and even the wolverine, that growling, blunt-headed little thief of the snow, did not take the trouble to follow the line of empty traps that Kotuko set. The tribe lost a couple of their best hunters, who were badly crippled in a fight with the musk ox, and this threw more work on the others. Kotuko went out day after day with a light hunting sleigh and 6 or 7 of the strongest dogs, looking till his eyes ached for some patch of clear ice where a seal might perhaps have scratched a breathing hole. Kotuko the dog ranged far and wide, and in the dead stillness of the ice field Kotuko the boy could hear his half-choked whine of excitement above a seal hole 3 miles away, as plainly as though he were at his elbow. When the dog found a hole, the boy would build himself a little low snow wall to keep off the worst of the bitter wind, and there he would wait 10, 12, 20 hours for the seal to come up and breathe, his eyes glued to the tiny mark he had made above the hole to guide the downward thrust of his harpoon, a little sealskin mat under his feet, and his legs tied together in the tutariang, the buckle that the old hunters had talked about. This helps to keep a man's legs from twitching as he waits and waits and waits for the quick-eared seal to rise. Though there is no excitement about it, you can easily believe that the sitting still in the buckle with the thermometer perhaps 40 degrees below zero is the hardest work an Inuit knows. When a seal was caught, Kotuko the dog would bound forward, his trace trailing behind him, and help to pull the body to the sleigh, where the tired and hungry dogs lay sullenly under the lee of the broken ice. A seal did not go very far, for each mouth in the little village had a right to be filled, and neither bone, hide, or sinew was wasted. The dog's meat was taken for human use, and Amarak fed the team with pieces of old summer skin tents raked out from under the sleeping bench. And they howled and howled again, and waked to howl hungrily. One could tell by the soapstone lamps in the huts that famine was near. In good seasons, when blubber was plentiful, the light in the boat-shaped lamps would be 2 feet high, cheerful, oily, and yellow. Now it was a bare 6 inches. Amarak carefully pricked down the moss wick when an unwatched flame brightened for a moment, and the eyes of all the family followed her hand. The horror of famine up there in the great cold is not so much dying as dying in the dark. All the Inuit dread the dark that presses on them without a break for 6 months in each year. And when the lamps are low in the houses, the minds of the people begin to be shaken and confused. But worse was to come. The underfed dogs snapped and growled in the passages, glaring at the cold stars and snuffing into the bitter wind, night after night. When they stopped howling, the silence fell down again as solid and heavy as a snowdrift against the door, and men could hear the beating of the blood in the thin passages of the ear and the thumping of their own hearts, that sounded as loud as the noise of sorcerers' drums beaten across the snow. One night Kotuko the dog, who had been unusually sullen in harness, leaped up and pushed his head against Kotuko's knee. Kotuko patted him, but the dog still pushed blindly forward, fawning. Then Kadlu waked and gripped the heavy wolf-like head and stared into the glassy eyes. The dog whimpered and shivered between Kadlu's knees. The hair rose about his neck, and he growled as though a stranger were at the door. Then he barked joyously and rolled on the ground and bit at Kotuku's boot like a puppy. "What is it?" said Kotuku, for he was beginning to be afraid. "The sickness," Kadlu answered. "It is the dog sickness." Kotuku the dog lifted his nose and howled again. "I have not seen this before. What will he do?" said Kotuku. Kadlu lifted one shoulder a little and crossed the hut for his short stabbing harpoon. The big dog looked at him, howled again, and slunk away down the passage, while the other dogs drew aside right and left to give him ample room. When he was out on the snow he barked furiously as though on the trail of a musk ox, and barking and leaping and frisking passed out of sight. His trouble was not hydrophobia, but simple, plain madness. The cold and the hunger, and above all the dark, had turned his head, and when the terrible dog sickness once shows itself in a team, it spreads like wildfire. Next day another dog sickened and was killed then and there by Kotuku as he bit and struggled among the traces. Then the black second dog, who had been the leader in the old days, suddenly gave tongue on an imaginary reindeer track, and when they slipped him from the pitu he flew at the throat of an ice cliff and ran away as his leader had done, his harness on his back. After that no one would take the dogs out again. They needed them for something else, and the dogs knew it, and although they were tied down and fed by hand, their eyes were full of despair and fear. To make things worse, the old women began to tell ghost tales, and to say that they had met the spirits of the dead hunters lost that autumn, who prophesied all sorts of horrible things. Kotuku grieved more for the loss of his dog than anything else, for although an Inuit eats enormously, he also knows how to starve. But the hunger, the darkness, the cold, and the exposure told on his strength, and he began to hear voices inside his head, and to see people who were not there out of the tail of his eye. One night he had unbuckled himself after 10 hours waiting above a blind seal hole, and was staggering back to the village, faint and dizzy. He halted to lean his back against a boulder, which happened to be supported like a rocking stone on a single jutting point of ice. His weight disturbed the balance of the thing. It rolled over ponderously, and as Kotuku sprang aside to avoid it, slid after him, squeaking and hissing on the ice slope. That was enough for Kotuku. He had been brought up to believe that every rock and boulder had its owner, its Inua, who was generally a one-eyed kind of woman thing called a tornak, and that when the tornak meant to help a man, she rolled after him inside her stone house, and asked him whether he would take her for a guardian spirit. In summer thaws the ice-propped rocks and boulders roll and slip all over the face of the land, so you can easily see how the idea of live stones arose. Kotuku heard the blood beating in his ears as he had heard it all day, and he thought that it was the tornak of the stone speaking to him. Before he reached home he was quite certain that he had held a long conversation with her, and as all his people believed that this was quite possible, no one contradicted him. "She said to me, I jumped down from my place on the snow," cried Kotuku, with hollow eyes, leaning forward in the half-lighted hut. "She said, I will be a guide. She said, I will guide you to the good seal holes. Tomorrow I go out and the tornak will guide me." End of section 17.